Okay, thanks for waiting, everyone. We've got a few more people that just joined, so we'll go ahead and get started. So today is our Getting Executive Support for Your BI Program webinar, presented by our healthcare practice leader, Laura Madsen. For those of you that are not familiar with Lancet, we have been in the BI industry for about 13 years. We have over 30 certified BI professionals working in our company. Laura, I'll let Laura explain her background a little bit better than I can, but from here I'll just give the floor to Laura. Go ahead.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate your time today. And as Serena said, my name is Laura Madsen, and I've been working in business intelligence now for just over 10 years. I've done a little bit of everything during that time. I'm actually trained as an analyst and have spent most of my time digging down into the data and understanding how data works, and I've spent some time looking at data models as well as just about every BI tool that's ever existed. And I've also had a fair amount of experience in the leadership of BI programs. I joined Lancet just about a year and a half ago as their practice leader. I have an industry vertical focus for healthcare, as well as an industry horizontal, if you think about it like that, of helping organizations get started with business intelligence. And today we're going to talk a little bit about how to get executive support for your BI program. Just a few weeks ago, I read a Twitter feed that postulated the only reason that BI programs need executive sponsorship is so consultants can have someone to sell to. Well, I disagree with that theory, and for the next hour we will discuss why. The important thing that you need to know is that much of what is here was evolved when I wasn't a consultant, and as I found that without a strong executive sponsor, I wasn't able to gain traction. And this is my story. This is the key topics we will cover for today. And if you think of questions or related topics, please send those as a message in the chat box on the web meeting, and I'll do my best to integrate them into the topic. If I can't, I'd be happy to follow up with you directly on those questions. We're going to obviously spend some time learning why executive sponsorship is critical and how to have some of those key discussions that you need to have with those folks. We'll listen to methods of creating support infrastructure and processes for your BI program. We'll discover the art of selling and marketing your BI program, and we'll also talk a little bit about how to calculate your program's return on investment, or ROI. First of all, we have to understand that BI programs. BI programs and put them into context. BI programs are not just projects, and they're not just your developers. There are key considerations for getting a BI program started, and here are 3 major categories to consider. The operational aspect of BI programs is the type of things that you have to do to run your department. Functional category are the infrastructure and processes that are critical to delivery, and delivery is the thing that your program delivers as a result of the other work. These topics are not inclusive of everything you have to have in place, but they cover some of the primary topics that are being discussed in boardrooms all over the country. You might remember this visual from your 5th grade science class. You have to keep in mind that in order to do good BI, you have to deliver it within a larger organization. If you do that, there is no area that BI won't touch or impact. Any of these things that are over-allocated or under-allocated will impact your program's ability to deliver. For example, if there's no architecture, you have no foundation. Without metadata, you have no way to integrate, in this case, the soil and water, to provide nutrients for governance and reports and analysis to grow. In turn, without customers, you will have less data and less need for reports and analysis. Without customers, your BI world would completely end, and without executives, there's no opportunity for renewal. This is a balance, and ignoring any one item or putting too much emphasis on any one item throws the entire ecosystem off balance. So why is the most important person on your team your sponsor? Well, you can't be in the boardroom every time your project comes up. And if it's expensive, it will come up a lot. So make sure that your sponsor is well informed and highly engaged. It could mean the difference between funding and ending. Just having a sponsor isn't enough, though. You have to have a sponsor that is highly engaged in the project and is able to be an advocate for your program when the door to the boardroom closes. In order to do this, you must keep them in the loop, and that's you. Allowing anyone else to do it provides an opportunity for the program's success to be defined by someone else's standards. I have an example for you. I found my executive sponsor the old-fashioned way. He was my boss's boss. When we first started talking about BI, the focus of the conversations were generally around the fact that he couldn't get reports without waiting for weeks, and then he didn't trust the data once he got them. He'd ask me what this BI thing it was I kept talking about. In the beginning, he was very willing but not very informed. It took a while to get him up to speed, but he intuitively understood the value of BI from very early on. That was because I put the benefits in the terms that he understood, such as we will improve timelines of reports, we will improve data quality. Towards the end of my tenure there, he could stand toe-to-toe with just about anyone, including the CIO, and talk about the BI program, implications of certain decisions, and more technical details such as the value of metadata and data modeling. He got it because he had to in order to improve his work life. You have a potential sponsor out there. Just put the terms of success in language he can understand. There are generally 3 types of roles that you can have the conversation with when you're looking for an executive sponsor. Traditional roles, an influencer role, and a grassroots effort. We'll talk about each one in detail. If you work at a very large company, odds are you won't be able to reach anyone in a traditional role. If you have a relationship with someone at a traditional role level, but you don't think it's the right person to talk to, for example, maybe you know the head of HR, set up some time to talk with them and have them help you decide who to talk to. See if they're willing to make an introduction. In this case, a traditional role is working like an influencer. An influencer doesn't always have the right title, but they are well respected in an organization. For my company, it was the VP of Marketing. I managed to get him and the Senior VP of Client Services in a room for a demo of our new reporting tool. During the demo, I raised the topic of BI. Then there's the grassroots effort. And don't underestimate the power of grassroots efforts. Yeah, it's slow, and yes, your name will likely not be attributed to a successful completion. But if you are driven to create a BI program because it's the right thing to do, there are very few things as powerful as bringing everyone with you. While I started with a conversation to an influencer and a traditional role, I've also had good grassroots efforts underway. In this scenario, I started out with our IT organization, the group that was feeling the most pain from an inappropriate support of a client-deployed reporting tool. Framing the conversation to their traditional role is probably the most difficult, unless you have a good relationship with them already. It's important to think about it from their perspective. If they are the CFO, frame the discussion around cost-benefit model, but don't promise an ROI, and we'll talk about why later. If they lead your customer relationship department, tell them why the customer would benefit. For traditional roles, it's important to be brief but clear. Think like a Boy Scout and always be prepared, or a Girl Scout. And always be prepared for a traditional role conversation. Have an elevator speech ready to go. This way you're prepared to give them the spiel anywhere you can. Please avoid the bathroom. That's a true story, by the way. When you have piqued their interest, ask them if you can set up a meeting. The influencer is a bit easier. Just ask them for some of their time. And grassroots efforts is exactly what it sounds like, whenever and wherever you can, not in the bathroom. Some key discussion points. Think about what you should say. The influencer certainly will care about things the traditional role will care about. They'll just have a little bit more time to commit to you. They'll be interested to know the risk associated with something like this. If they will be sticking their necks out to get the program started, they want to know it's a no-brainer. They want to be able to understand and defend the need for the program to anyone who asks. You need to supply them with the ammunition. Discuss case studies or other places you have worked, especially impactful if you've worked at a competitor. Provide all the benefits and some of the likely disadvantages. You want to be really candid with them. Investment is a good example. Any questions or comments? Feel free to use the chat box. I know this is a webinar, but I'd like to make sure that you guys get what you need out of it. So feel free to send me questions throughout the webinar, and I'll try to do my best to get those in place.
Unmuted.
We just unmuted you guys, so we can hear you now. So we'll pose that question one more time. Does anybody have any questions on this section of the webinar thus far? Okay.
Take that as a no. We'll get started on a marketing plan. Okay. There's nothing magic about the marketing plan template. Its primary function is to organize your thoughts and help create the next steps. Most marketing plans have a couple things in common. They tell you what, when, how, and where the program is going to launch. They often include general information about the company, the objective of the program, and some information about competitors. This is important because it puts things into perspective. The most salient part of the marketing plan is the communication plan. I use communication plans as separate documents for other projects. For example, I have a communication plan that is specific to an enterprise reporting application. I also have one for a data stewardship program. Anything where we will be consistently sending out messages to our customer base, we create a communication plan for. Most of the time they are incorporated into marketing plans, but not always. So why is this important? And I guess that if you're spending this time with me, you probably already know why it's important. And we all have stories about a time when we were working on a project that was going fairly well, but when the budget got tight, it was the first thing that was cut, or even before the budget got tight. Data warehousing projects are a little tough that way. It's difficult to show the business the tangible value of investing $10 million to organize your data. Besides addressing the best practice of ensuring that you are delivering business capabilities as quickly and as frequently as you can, and if you aren't doing this, there's no marketing plan that can help you. You have to communicate to stakeholders, a lot. You have to tell them and retell them. Anyone in education will tell you that repetition is the key to learning. So even though you feel like you've told them everything that they could possibly need to know, you have to tell them again in a different way. There are 5 main sections in a marketing plan. Some sections should be easy and others will be more difficult. We'll review each. First, we have the corporate mission, and it's important from an alignment perspective. You want to ensure that your program aligns with the corporate mission. If it doesn't, then you're probably set up to be challenged. All of your objectives should be consistent from the corporate mission down to the marketing objectives. This should extend all the way to what you're communicating about. As you release content into your data warehouse with business capabilities, those business capabilities should align directly to a corporate mission. For example, if you are releasing a new product to the market and much of your corporate attention, strategy, and finances back the release, so should your content. When you communicate about the release, make sure that the connection between the corporate strategy and your release is called out, such as, in support of our corporate strategy, the BI team has. So much like the mission statement, the program objective is an important communication tool. It should tell the reader the who, what, and why. Using a funnel analogy, it is more refined and specific than the corporate mission. It's specific to the program you are working on. For the broader team working on your project, it's good to know the overall objective. For the marketing plan, it helps put the specific details in context. If your marketing activity doesn't meet one of the objectives, then you shouldn't do it. So in other words, for each of these layers of the marketing plan, they should be related to each other and align quite well. If you don't have a program objective already written, here's a good example of how one is generally written. This is pretty general, but the program is funded and supported to address the client and information needs. In addition, our internal departments need broader access to information to improve operational efficiency, measure program and product efficiency, and research and develop for new product releases. It's very important to know your audience. This is true regardless to the content you are communicating about. I have seen very smart people communicate to an audience in a way that completely loses the message. If you know you aren't good at communicating, be sure to have your copy edited by someone in your corporate communications group or your marketing team. We have spent some time defining our audience in a more detailed way. We have used personas to detail out our program audience. In the web world, they use personas to help inform their development. Personas were created based on observation, customer surveys, and focus groups. They are often referred to as use cases or role-based design. You can start by creating personas based on a standard bell curve of predefined personas, such as executives, analysts, power users, etc. Using data, you can refine the general personas. The results of this work can be used across many areas, including your user interface development and refinement, report development, and communications. Knowing your audience at this level of specificity will only help target your development and communication efforts. Talk a little bit about each of these personas that we have represented here. The executive on the left-hand side of this bell curve is relatively rare, but doesn't always imply a senior level executive. They are just a person who doesn't have a lot of time or capability to respond to prompts. On the other side of the continuum are the analysts. Today, most organizations have a lot of analysts, in title anyway. When I refer to an analyst in this scenario, I am referring to people in your organization that know the data very well. They are the people that you go to when you need answers. As a generalization, analysts prefer to get their hands right into the data. They don't mind a less than user-friendly user interface. They focus on the end result much more than the journey. For most organizations, the true analysts are less than 3% of their staff. The remainder of your users falls into the center part of the bell curve, the middle majority. They vary in their skill set and capability. Where some are just barely able to respond to prompts, others will border on analytic capabilities. The majority of this group, however, has the ability to respond to prompts and run basic reports without much trouble. Because of this varying skill level, the interactive users are the most difficult to manage. For example, something like a clunky add-on wouldn't faze the users on the right-hand side of the continuum, and the ones on the left side are practically beside themselves. If you do nothing else, create the communication plan. While there is value in thinking through the other sections of the plan to ensure alignment, the communication plan is the primary deliverable. This section helps you ensure that your communications are consistent and have an appropriate frequency. You can hand this off to someone else to support, and don't overestimate how long it takes. While it seems like it would take no time to write an email and send it out, you need to ensure that the message is the right one. And also, if you don't have a way to manage email groups, that can take a fair amount of time. If you do decide to create personas for your audience, you can create your communication plans around those audiences. For example, your analysts will likely prefer something more like release notes, whereas your executives would prefer bulleted lists of what was coming up in the next release. You may ask yourself, if we aren't building our BI project to best the competitor, why would I add this section? And that is a question only you can answer. I would challenge that much like alignment from the corporate mission all the way down to the deliverables from your project, if you aren't aligning your project with the competitive landscape, then you may be setting yourself up to be challenged. If you're not helping your company compete, what are you doing? There are some industries that perhaps this doesn't apply, such as the government, but in those cases you should be considering the internal competition for a finite set of funds. Finally, the marketing objectives. This is the meat of the marketing plan. These activities can vary greatly. For example, some marketing activities that I've done have been very team-focused. It meets our objective of broadly sharing the mission of business intelligence. You want to make sure that you include some success parameters. These can be a little soft. For example, I listed moderate participation for a BI book club. I was more specific regarding the submission for our Luminary Awards because there's budget attached to those. You can be pretty creative in the type of activities that you do. For example, a BI book club is something that not a lot of organizations do, but the idea is to broadly share what BI is across your organization. And so each quarter we had a different book that was focused on business intelligence or analytics that a team of people would read and discuss. Awards are pretty common types of ways of organizations to recognize people within a particular team. I also did some things like a poster contest, and those posters actually had to do with what, almost like a poster research that you would have done in college to talk about what the release was doing, and then we'd invite people to look at the posters and that kind of a thing. So you can be pretty creative and try to cover the gamut of the types of activities that you want to do so that a broad audience is touched by your activities. Your marketing plan is only as good as the effort that goes into maintaining it. Once you have created the plan, you should find help to support it. Whether it's staff on your team or a separate marketing team that supports your efforts, make sure that everyone knows what they should be working on. The nature of the plan will lend itself to an organized approach. One thing you need to determine early on is who should the communication come from. Is there a team? Is there a VP or a marketing product manager? Once you have the plan and the person or persons that will be sending out the communications, it's time to start the work. Review your plan and make it into a recurring, hopefully, project plan with dates and resources attached. Many companies don't have a separate internal marketing team. If you work for one, you're fortunate. Your work is done once the plan is complete, but for the rest of us, we have to figure out who is going to help us deliver the content. It is very time-consuming. Determine who is going to help. You could ask a project manager to be responsible for project status updates. Regardless, the BI team needs to take lead on the communications, particularly if you're communicating out to a customer base. Take all the tasks and put them into the project plan. And time them so you won't make sure that they're timed so you don't have them all falling at the same time, and make sure you have time to do each of them. It's a good idea to do the project plan because that way you find out whether or not you have a whole bunch of things stacked on top of each other or things are taking too long or not long enough. Some should repeat and some should be a one-time communication. So don't get me wrong, just marketing your program isn't enough. You have to do the hard work of actually delivering value. The important thing is that people may not always know what you're doing or how great it is because they are too heads down. It's your job to tell them. A really good example happened to me just last week. In a meeting, the CIO was telling his point person that they needed to come up with a list of reports that the new BI solution could replace, improving efficiency and productivity. That would be the best kind of story you can tell. As you're marketing, be prepared for negative feedback. Data warehousing projects are difficult to keep on the forefront without getting people too excited. If they get too excited, they want everything yesterday. So when it takes you 6 months to deliver content, they get frustrated, while the team feels that 6 months was a miracle. Be prepared for a bad release once in a while. Be prompt and forthright in your response. People can see through if you're trying to spin the message. I'll give you a personal example. We were releasing a Java-based applet on top of our reporting application so users could save their report parameters and rerun reports. It was a functionality that they had requested, actually practically begged for. It took us quite a while to solve for this technically. In the beginning, we used focus groups and other feedback loops. But when we got to developing, we put our heads down and tried to get the content released as quickly as possible. It still took a year. By the time we released the content, users had gotten so used to the old way of doing things. To add insult to injury, it was not very user-friendly, focused release because we were more concerned about the content. I had just left on maternity leave a few weeks before, so a new person had to deal with the repercussions. The release was a disaster. When I came back from leave, we held a user group meeting, and I simply apologized. I made no excuses and requested that if the functionality was not what they wanted, we would uninstall it and start over. In the end, we decided to focus on the user interface and improve some of the functionality. But users eventually came to like the applet. We were forthright and prepared to make a mid-course correction. That's all anyone can ask for. Okay. Any questions or comments on that section? Marketing plan? I do have a template. If anyone's interested in looking at that template, you can just email us and we'd be happy to send it your way. Okay? Good. Next section. The art of selling. There is no question that there's definitely an art to selling, and it's important because not everyone understands the value of your BI program. And we may not like it that much, but it definitely is our job. If you recall our discussion about BI ecosystems, you will understand why organizational readiness is an important factor in BI success criteria and the selling of a BI program. Depending on your level in the organization, you may not be in a position to do anything about it, but understanding it and admitting that there is a problem is half the battle. As a result, you may decide to approach your selling differently. There is an assessment called the Organizational Readiness for Change Scale, written by Thomas A. Stewart, originally appeared in the Fortune magazine in 1994. That may give you some insight. Considerations for that scale are listed here, such as sponsorship, leadership, motivation, direction, measurements, strategic fit of the work that you're doing, processes, any kind of a prior experience with change, innovation, morale and decision making, and there were a couple of other factors or considerations for whether or not your organization is ready for change. You have to ask yourself what kind of organization you work in and what type of risk you are willing to take. Do you want to ask for permission or forgiveness? Permission doesn't always take longer, but it does require that you have a solid business case. Asking for forgiveness sometimes means taking a different approach. In other words, showing the executives the value gained from such an exercise. For example, using open source tools and creating a prototype. Just know that if it looks too easy, you may be stuck continuing doing it with limited funds. You may not want to ask for forgiveness if it falls way outside of your job's role. Much of selling is about who you're dealing with. There's a fine line between getting the deal and getting the boot. Don't pull down the visor and show them the vanity mirror when they really want to look under the hood. The foot in the door simply means that you force the discussion. Forcing a discussion isn't always bad, particularly if you look for teaching moments. Those moments when there is a silence around the table because 3 reports have different numbers but claim to be pulling the same thing. Take that opportunity to position the BI program as the cure for what ails you. A presumptive close means that you assume that someone will agree with your decision, closely related to the asking for forgiveness concept in the previous slide. You don't always have to take it all the way, but if there is an opportunity to fill a need, you can always just fill it. Just be prepared to articulate why doing it your way is better than not doing it at all, especially if there's money involved. Objections will happen. The important thing is how you respond to them. Be prepared for some of the more common ones and think about how your organization generally approaches large projects and enterprise IT purchases. You should have a ready answer for, "That sounds expensive," or "What's wrong with how we do it now?" Objections like, "Let me think about it," require a bit more savvy, but at least you should be prepared to offer a follow-up and give them time to consider. Any questions or comments, please use the chat box. Okay, let's skip along here. Talking a little bit about how to calculate a return on investment. Scarce resources are really making budgets more difficult. So if your program supports some of the other budgeted projects, then you have a stronger case for budget dollars. So keep in mind that ROI is really about competing with other projects. So if you can't beat them, join them. Here's the step-by-step for creating a return on investment calculation. First, you have to define the business goals. Then you have to quantify those goals, calculating the ROI, determine opportunities for improvement, and have a continued program evaluation. What exactly constitutes a business goal? It's any request by the business that can be supported by an enterprise data warehouse through a business intelligence layer. So just about anything. The hard part is quantifying that. There are two aspects of quantifying goals. The intangibles represent anything that's not quantifiable. Intangibles are those things that are relatively easy to quantify. So what does that really mean? This is a good method for determining how to assess an intangible from the ROI Institute. How do you determine whether or not it's really an intangible factor or not? For many of the items you're considering, it's quite easy to make that distinction. So here's a question. Is there a standard value? Is there a method to get there? Can we get there with minimal resources? And can we convince our executives in 2 minutes or less that the value is credible? In other words, we must measure the current state, the business processes, associated labor costs, and direct expenses. We can come up with a dollar figure that represents the sum of these costs. If the cost of our BI solution is less than the cost of the problem, then most reasonable business leaders would fast-track the project. There's two ways to think about this. There's an opportunity cost of not doing anything. So if you can make a case for projected sales without business intelligence versus projected sales with business intelligence, you'll be able to show that the gap represents an opportunity cost or an opportunity lost. Try to make that as tangible as possible. There's also the same view except from a post-implementation perspective. So how many sales did we make, for example, the previous year, and then how many did we add on because we had a business intelligence capability? Keep in mind that the best practice is to discount the impact of the intangibles somewhere between 10 to 40%. This risk adjustment provides the opportunity to include these important factors in your analysis without putting your investment at risk. Measurable productivity increases. So there's a difference between highly paid associates taking 5 to 7 days to assemble reports to a few minutes, and it's a powerful cost savings. You can't really scale this up to overall time saved, but such studies can give a good indication of increased productivity, and if accompanied by some conservative cost estimates, can be presented in terms of actual money saved. Usage and user retention can be calculated from your admin tools. Demand for enhancements should be well known by your governance group. And if you aren't doing satisfaction surveys, you should consider doing them. Hopefully, the users are mentioning the system positively. How about risk avoidance? If you work in an area that can be sued for lack of data or regulatory reasons, it's a big motivator to avoid litigation. These can all be intangible aspects or intangible parts of your ROI calculation. But let's be clear. No one is going to take your word for it. Just because you put it down on paper doesn't necessarily make it true. Even following the best practices of downgrading the effect of the intangibles, you may still meet resistance. In a conversation with the CFO about an ROI analysis that I had completed, he questioned my methodology, specific to a calculation I had made attributing a percentage of sales to the BI program. The calculation made my ROI positive. Without it, it was negative for more than a 3-year period. Even though I had discounted the value of the intangible metric, we had only allocated 2% of the sale to a BI program, and had validated the assumption with the VP of sales backed by our lost sales surveys. It was still removed from the calculation. You must not only quantify whatever you can, but have a strong business case behind including it in the calculation. Even then, you may not be able to convince everyone. Here are a couple of easy ROI calculations. The net present value of savings divided by the initial investment plus the initial cost times 100. To determine the payback period, you have the initial investment plus maintenance cost divided over the net present value of savings in years, the total number of years. The easiest way to think about ROI is obviously gain from investment minus the cost of investment over the cost of investment. Once the benefits are stated and quantified as much as possible, calculate the ROI using an organization standard. The standard annual ROI calculation divides the annual benefits by the total annual cost to determine the annual return on investment percentage. So here's an example. We'd spent $250,000 in software, 22% in maintenance fees, which is $55,000. We also bought $20,000 in hardware. We were able to claim saving 1.5 FTE at $75,000 annual salary, which brought us to about $112,000. We attributed 2% of the revenue of all sales to the new BI platform. The average sale was about $120,000, and the average number of sales was 1,500. Reduced projection in 2009 to 950, which brought it to just over $2 million. So this made this ROI positive. For every dollar spent, there was $6.36 returned. Most of us will likely end up with something like 0.11, but anything positive is better than negative. Okay. So today we covered getting executive support, some key discussion points and who you should have those conversations with. We reviewed the marketing plan and the activities associated with those marketing plans. We talked a little bit about the art of selling and how to calculate an ROI. All of these are pretty high-level topics, just touched on briefly. We want to know if there are any questions, comments, or concerns about the topics we discussed today. I will unmute you. Okay. Any questions? Curious if everyone felt like, and you don't have to answer it loud, you can use the chat box for this. Curious if this content, although high level, was hitting the mark for what you were looking for. I think there are still people on the phone. Okay. All right, if there are no questions or comments even, we'll close out today's webinar. All right, well, thank you very much for joining us. And if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to send those to us And we'll look forward to having you at another Lancet webinar.